Wow, that is really hard. You always left me satisfied and smiling.
That's what she said.
Michael Scott is a boss who has never once acted like one, and I think that's exactly what makes him one of the most interesting characters ever put on television. Because if you actually sit with his behavior long enough and stop laughing at it for a second, you start to realize that what the show was filming wasn't just a comedy about an awkward middle manager in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
It's not personal.
I'm gonna myself.
Wow.
I'm going to myself, and it's your fault.
There's a philosopher called Nietzsche who wrote about what happens when the person at the top of any group decides that being liked matters more to them than actually leading. And the short version of his argument is that it doesn't just affect the person making that choice. It slowly hollows out everyone underneath them because the people beneath a leader need that leader to actually be one. And when that doesn't happen, the cost lands on them whether they realize it or not. Now, I'm not here to give you a philosophy lecture because that's not what this video is about. The reason I'm even bringing Nietzsche up is because when you watch The Office through that lens, you stop seeing Michael Scott as a lovable idiot and you start seeing him as a case study. And what that show was actually documenting over 9 seasons was the very specific damage that one man's inability to lead did to the people around him.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
What's the
Everybody
procedure,
stay calm.
everyone? What's the procedure?
Stay calm.
Wait.
Now, if you've never watched The Office, Michael Scott is the regional manager of Dunder Mifflin's Scranton branch, which is a mid-sized paper supply company, and his entire identity is built around one idea, which is that his office is his family, and he is the fun dad that everyone loves and wants to be around. And in his head, that's not just how he sees himself, that's genuinely what he believes his job is. He thinks being the most popular person in the building is the actual job description. And the thing that makes Michael so watchable and so frustrating in equal measure is that he's not completely wrong about one thing, which is that people in that office do genuinely love him. There are real moments throughout the show where you can see that the affection is genuine and that Michael has created something in that building that most workplaces don't have, which is a sense that this place matters. The problem is that he built all of that on top of a complete refusal to do the actual work of being a manager, and those two things lived side by side for 9 seasons. The warmth and the failure, and the show let you laugh at the failure while the warmth kept you from looking too closely at what it was actually costing everyone. Every manager has moments where the room genuinely needs them to step up and handle something, and those moments aren't complicated. They're things like sitting down with an employee and being honest with them about their performance. Michael got those moments constantly because that's what the job involves. What Michael did with every single one of those moments was the same thing. He made himself the subject of one of them. So a performance review that was supposed to be about the employee would become Michael asking the employee if they thought he was doing a good job. And a firing that was supposed to be clean and professional would dissolve into Michael having an emotional breakdown that the person being fired would then have to manage.
No one here likes you in the office, and we are going to have to let you go. We will be ushering you out.
And the reason this matters is not just that Michael was bad at his job. Plenty of people are bad at their jobs and it doesn't make for 9 seasons of television. The reason it matters is that Michael always knew what authority was being asked of him and he chose not to exercise it. Jim is the most talented person in that office by a distance, and I think most people who've watched the show would agree with that without much argument. He's quick and personable and he reads people well, and he has the kind of natural competence that makes everything look effortless. And in a different environment under a different manager, Jim probably works out what he wants from his life and goes and gets it before he turns 30 because he has everything he needs to do that. What Jim never had was anyone above him who asked anything of him. And that sounds like a good thing on the surface, but the reality of it over a long enough timeline is that Jim just drifted, and he drifted because Michael loved Jim in that unconditional, slightly desperate way that Michael loved anyone who made him feel cool, and that love expressed itself as total acceptance of whatever Jim chose to do with his time. Also, if you are enjoying this video, make sure to subscribe, as I do post weekly every Sunday, so subscribe to never miss a video. So by the time Jim actually tries to build something real outside of that office, he's fighting against years of accumulated inertia, and the marriage nearly doesn't survive it because Pam had been watching Jim sleepwalk for long enough that she'd stopped believing he was going to wake up, and Jim had to fight his way out of a version of his life that he'd never consciously chosen. chosen. He'd just never been asked to choose differently. Now, Dwight is obviously the comedic centerpiece of the show in a lot of ways, and the show leans into that hard. He apparently wrote himself. The almost religion devotion to a man who openly mocks him on a regular basis. Dwight is written to be ridiculous, and he is ridiculous. There's no getting around that. But underneath all of that, Dwight genuinely believed that authority meant something and that hierarchy existed for a reason, and that a boss should actually lead, and that structure in a workplace wasn't something to be embarrassed about. And if you strip away everything weird about Dwight and just look at the core belief, that instinct that the way a team is organized and led actually matters and has real consequences for the people in it. That instinct is not wrong, and in most functional workplaces, a version of Dwight with better social skills would be genuinely valuable. Michael found this instinct hilarious, not in a cruel way because Michael doesn't really do cruelty, but in that reflexive way he had of finding anything earnest or serious to be fundamentally comic. So every time Dwight tried to enforce a standard, Michael undercut it, and every time Dwight asserted any kind of authority, Michael turned it into a bit. And the assistant to the regional manager title, which Dwight treated as his most prized possession, existed because Michael wanted to give Dwight the feeling of status without any of the actual weight of it. Now, if you've watched the later seasons of The Office with everything we've just talked about in mind, you start to notice something in the background of scenes that's easy to miss, which is that the people who've been in that office the longest have slowly become a version of the environment they've been living in. And the environment they've been living in is one where nothing is really required for anyone, and the office itself has become a substitute for an actual life. Kevin has effectively stopped pretending to engage with the work, and in the early seasons, his incompetence reads as a character trait, but by the later seasons, it feels more like a man who has genuinely internalized the idea that what he does at his desk doesn't connect to anything meaningful, so why bother? And then there's Andy, who arrives at Scranton and spends several seasons becoming a progressively worse version of Michael Scott. Michael didn't design any of this, and he certainly didn't intend it, but he modeled every single day that the office was a substitute for a real life, and that the people in it were a substitute for a real family, and eventually the people who stayed long enough started to believe the same thing. When Michael leaves in season 7, the send-off the show gives him is genuinely moving, and I don't think that's an accident because the writers understood that the love in that room was real. These people weren't crying because they felt like they should. They were crying because someone who had been the emotional center of their world for years was leaving, and they didn't know what the place would be without him. And the episode works because it earns that grief honestly. But genuine love and good love are not the same thing, and I think that's the distinction the show was always quietly making, even while it was asking you to root for Michael and laugh at Michael and feel for Michael. Because if you look at what those people in that room are actually crying over, it's not a mentor, and it's not someone who pushed them towards something they couldn't see in themselves. It's someone who made them feel completely safe and never once asked them what that safety was costing them. Jim is still figuring out what he wants from his life in his mid-30s, and only barely saves his marriage in the process. Dwight gets the manager role in that final episode, which is the role he should have been actively developing toward years earlier, and the rest of them are essentially unchanged. That's what Nietzsche was pointing at when he wrote about leaders who collapse the distance between themselves and the people beneath them, because from the outside it looks like warmth and it reads like love, and it fills the room with the feeling that everything is fine and that this place is special, and underneath all of that, the people who needed something more than a friend in that position were paying a price they didn't know they'd agreed to pay. Michael Scott didn't ruin anyone. He didn't set to hold anyone back, and I genuinely believed he loved those people as much as he was capable of loving anyone. But love without the willingness to actually lead the people you love isn't enough. And 9 seasons of television made that case more carefully and more honestly than any of the characters in it ever realized.